Interviewing for management positions is hard. It requires giving you certain answers to questions, and more importantly, you're expected to tell good stories. Today, let me focus on storytelling. In my 20 years of experience, I've been on both sides. I've been interviewing for management positions, and also I'm regularly assessing management candidates. Let me tell you what I've learned. Why does storytelling even matter in an interview? Well, the problem is that during a management interview, there are no hard skills that you need to demonstrate. There are no technical riddles that you can solve and impress the interviewers. It all depends on how well you can talk, how well you can talk your way out of the interview. I have seen many candidates who are good at management, but they just don't have the skills, they don't have the preparation for interviewing. And unfortunately, in today's market, who will be hired is the one who knows how to pass interviews, not the ones who really knows how to manage people. Before we dive into storytelling, quick note about preparation. If you come to an interview prepared, it shows, and it gives you a great advantage. There is nothing worse than a candidate who comes to an interview, you ask them a couple of very common questions, and they look puzzled and they're scrambling, trying to come up with any kind of answer just to fill the silence. So what I mean is that researching most common questions is pretty much a must before you go to an interview. How do we approach those questions? There are two main question types asked in management interviews: situational and behavioral. Some interviewers, they prefer one, some prefer the other. Situational questions are mostly hypothetical questions. When you are given a situation or you are given a problem and you are asked to fantasize, to imagine, and to talk the interviewer through how you would deal with that situation. It can sound something like, we need to increase sales, this is the situation we're in, what would you do? What would be your steps? How would you approach it? On the other hand, behavioral questions are questions that most typically, stereotypically, they sound like, tell me about a time. So these are the questions where an interviewing is asking for an example from your past experience. To both of these questions, I would say that the strongest answer includes some form of storytelling. A great story adapted to the question is an amazing proof that not only you have an idea how to approach this problem, but also that you have done this before, and that when you have to do it the next time, you already know you have not only the knowledge, but you also have the experience and the confidence to address that problem. Thorough interview preparation requires you to come up with a variety of your success stories. At the minimum, I would say you need 5. I've seen some people who prepare up to 30 different success stories. Here's a list of most common behavioral and situational questions. So imagine you're asked one of these questions and you have to quickly come up with a story so that it looks natural, that you don't go for 5 minutes into your head and try to quickly figure something out, put something together. If you have some stories already prepared, already in your mind, then it will be much easier to pull one of them, maybe tweak it a little bit to address exactly the question, and then you will feel much more confident. Step 1 is to start coming up with your success stories with different situations where you excelled. So of course we're starting with your work experience, so you can try to remember your recent projects, recent challenges you've had. Try to include not just your most recent workplace, but also have some stories from other workplaces you've had that will show the variety and the diversity of your experience, that you did not just have one last job, as might feel if all your examples are coming from just most recent experience. If you don't have much work experience, then of course it will be hard to come up with many different stories. Then you can look at your hobbies, at your school life, at your personal life, at some of the challenges you have resolved, even volunteering. For example, maybe you organized a running club. maybe during a school project. There was a team project and you put together a team, you recruited members, you figured out who were the best schoolmates to add to your team, you tried to attract them to your team, you put the team together, you figured out some team dynamics, you resolved some conflicts. So if you lead the interviewer through all that, then that will sound pretty impressive, even though it had nothing to do with real work experience. As you are putting together your list of stories, try to make sure that for each of your strengths that you have a story, and for each of the typical questions that you have, if not a direct fitting story, but you can adopt one of the stories to fit that question. So now we have a list of stories. Now for each story, we need to write down several points to make sure that we remember what the story was actually about. I recommend following STAR framework, where we start with the situation, with the background of what was happening. Then T is target or goal, what you were trying to achieve, what the organization or team was trying to achieve. Then the meat of the story, the main part. These are your actions. So here the main two parts, it's your and actions. So actions have to be yours, because if you're just telling a story from the position of a passive observer, then there will be a question as to, and what did you do there? So your team excelled, all right. You just enabled the team to excel, but you did not do anything special there. So why should we hire you? And also, well, actions is the actual things you did. So there wasn't an automatic or magical transition from goal into result. There were some things such as you resolved conflicts, such as you recruited some new people, or you provided feedback, or you set some more specific goals for the team so that they can achieve them, stuff like that. And in the end, we're coming to our result. So result is our interpretation of how it all worked out, how it all played out, how successful it was. Here, it would be great to include some numbers or some qualifiers that will confirm that in the end, the result, the project was really successful. And you are also sometimes asked to talk about a failure, to talk about a time when you failed, when you couldn't do something, when you had a conflict, you couldn't resolve it. So in these stories, the result will consist of two parts. So first part will be the statement of, this is the negative outcome that happened. Don't spend too much time there, because you will need to transition onto the successful outcome right away. You will need to then note lessons learned, new approaches you figured out, and ideally you transition into, because of that failure, we learned something, we changed our approach, and in the next project we succeeded. That's how you can turn a failure story into a success story. Third step, for each story, you need to come up with some very specific details. That is to make sure that your story doesn't sound overly abstract, overly generic. Because quite often we're hearing stories such as, so our goal, we were working in sales, great sales team, our goal was to increase sales, we worked hard, we increased, and we surpassed expectations. So, is this story convincing? Not at all. It's like, we had a goal, we achieved the goal, we're great. There's no story, there's no essence, there are no details behind it. So for each story, you need not many, but at least 2 or 3 very specific and memorable details. It can be some numbers, so it could be dollar amounts, the percentages, some KPIs that you were trying to hit and how the numbers were changing over time. It can be a description of people you worked with. So you can mention some of first names of people you worked with, some of key characters. Also, you can include names, places, anything that will help interviewer better imagine the story in their own head. At the same time, don't overload your story with details, Keep your stories short. Ideally, for behavioral question, your story should be between 2 and 3 minutes. To review the story preparation steps. Step 1, come up with a list of stories, at least 5, ideally maybe 10 stories. Some people go as far as 30 stories. Then add essential elements to each story. So I suggest following STAR framework. And also make each of these stories uniquely yours by adding some memorable details. This might seem like a lot of work. Well, yes, it is. But these stories, they will make your interview and they will make you so memorable for the interviewers. Like, if we have a candidate who tells, well, even 2 good stories throughout the entire interview, then we're talking about it, and definitely whatever skill, whatever proficiency they mentioned in those stories, well, we believe that. We know, well, that is what the person really did. To sum it up, management interviews are really difficult because there are no hard technical skills that you can demonstrate and impress with. You have to talk about your past projects, you have to talk about your past experiences, and you have to talk about how you would approach the future problems. And based on how well you can explain and how well you can tell those stories, that is how you will be judged if you are a good manager or not a good manager. So telling great stories gives you a great advantage in interviewing.